So I hope now you have a little bit more appreciation for why public parks and public spaces with plants and flowers and things like that are really important. So let's talk about the history of public parks a little bit. So way back in the 1850s, when parks started. By the way, our own local public park, Tatnall Square Park, started in 1853. So it's got quite a history. That's when it really became a park, but it has history even before that we're going to talk about. So anyway, if you get a chance to go visit the park, it's got so many awesome trees, and it's just a beautiful place to walk. And check out the stone benches around the fountain. The squiggly lines actually represents a Mulgee River, so it's really, really neat. All right, so let's talk about the history of public parks. So back in the 1850s, when public parks really started, they were considered what we call pastoral. So they were basically just fields. So that's really what kind of park. I dropped my cap. Hold on. Sorry. So that's really what kind of park Tatnall Square Park started as, is a pastoral park. There were fields, just places for people to meander, places for people to walk and ride their carriage. So it wasn't about necessarily, it wasn't necessarily about having games to play. It was just places for people to enjoy nature without having to go out into the wild, because that would be too scary. So they were pastoral. So these, because they were large tracts of land where people could go enjoy nature without having to actually venture into a forest or something terribly scary like that, they were located on the edges of town. So because they were located on the edges of town, they tended, not on purpose, but they did tend to lend themselves only to use by the wealthy. So they became places for the wealthy people to go congregate, not the working class. The working class people could not really get to them as easy, so they became places for the wealthy. Well, this had to be changed, right? So around in the 1900s to 1930, there was sort of, I guess, a little rebellion, you could say, in the parks, where people didn't want them to be for the wealthy anymore. They needed to be for the working class. So they became called reform parks. So the anything that government does, they always tend to swing really far, right? So the reform parks went a little bit too far. Reform parks actually got to be places where people would go, they could go and buy fresh produce, so they were fresh markets, and that's really great. And they also were places where, like, new immigrants could go to fill out paperwork and learn and have help filling out paperwork, things like that. So really, they became more about commerce. Not to say it's not important, but that's where people were going to shop and people were going to fill out paperwork, and it really kind of lost the physical activity recreational. So once again, we had a change. We had a little rebellion, and then parks in the 1930s to 1960s became more about recreational facilities. Recreational facilities. So once again, in my mind, things swing a little bit too far. So they really were not places where you could just go and say, let your kids run wild in the field, play some soccer. You could take a walk and enjoy a pond with some ducks or whatever. It lost that, and it really became about building stadiums. So stadiums for organized ball teams, things like that. So lots of very, very heavy on recreational facilities. So we did get some of that, but we're lucky we still maintain some of our pastoral parks as well, because there's good things about that, as long as we can make sure everybody can enjoy it. So recreational facilities. Now, in the 50s, with the rise of the automobile, and remember how we talked about after World War II, families became more insular, and it wasn't really so much about being with your neighbors and enjoying the neighborhood. Families became a tighter unit to themselves, as the soldiers coming home were very protective of their family unit. So rise of automobiles, tighter, I guess you could say more insular family units made people not really want to go out and enjoy the the local parks as much, but they could get to places. So we had a rise in national parks. So I'm going to put national parks rose about in the 1950s, and the local parks had a slowing down. Part of the reasons they also had a slowing down is because they were so heavy on recreational facilities, where it's more about teams and more about being very regulated, things like that, not just places where a family could go and just enjoy. So families tended to start going to national parks, and local parks started to decrease. So as these national parks decreased and people didn't want to go there, then you start getting, well, we're not going to put quite so many resources into it. You get a broken window. Then you get a broken window. You get people don't want to go to that area. People don't want to go to that area. You're going to have crime. The more crime, the less resources we want to put out there, and the less people want to go there. So it's a vicious cycle. So parks actually started really, really decreasing in the late 60s and 70s, and really became places for a lot of crime and a lot of drugs and things like that. So parks, actually, local parks started having a revival in the 1980s. And I believe it was 1984, but it was in the early 1980s that Friends of Tatnall Square Park really started being able to revive Tatnall Square Park, and they were able to fix the fountain. Once the fountain, the fountain had been broken. Once the fountain's broken, people feel that. People feel, well, this is broken. This is not really an inviting place to be. People don't go. Then that invites crime, so forth and so on. So in the 80s, the Friends of Tatnall Square Park were able to fix the fountain again and really get the park back to its original. A lot of those trees are actually original, so it's really neat. Back to its original state. So that was in the 80s, along with the whole sort of revival of local parks across the country. So what could the future of parks look like? Now that we've had a revival, what could we do with the future of parks? So I'm going to give you a few ideas. And you got this on your worksheet. I'm just going to say them, not going to write them, but I do want you to write them on your worksheet. And this might actually give you some more ideas. So the future of parks, they could be used to demonstrate ecological practices, okay? They could be used to become creative recycling centers. Or actually, when you think of a recycling center, you don't think creative. Well, think about games. What about if kids could come, because we're all about the environment in the future, right? What if the kids could come and take their plastic bottles, or especially if they got a can of something to drink or plastic bottle, they have a picnic. What if there's a place where they could actually throw it? Instead of throwing it into a basketball net, they threw it into a recycling bin. So we could actually use really creative recycling. They could become public farm plots. So in France, along some of the public areas, like the not really the metro, but the trains, I don't remember what they call the trains, but the trains that go out to the suburbs, along those train tracks, they actually have public farm plots. They could do that with parks, where people could just go and have their own little family farm plot, even especially if they don't have a very big yard or don't have any yard and they live in an apartment, they could still have a farm plot. So for public farm plots. Old landfills could actually become parks. Okay, so actually here in Gray, Georgia, they've kind of done that. They've taken an old landfill and they're very careful. They know what's in it, but they've actually made that old landfill a beautiful field, and they fly planes on it. Not real planes, not big planes. They fly the little remote control planes. So it's a remote control park. So old landfills could become parks. Also planting edible plants, edible food plants. So one of the architects that was working to help rebuild Tatnall Square Park actually had the idea that in the future, everything they planted out there should be edible. And somebody piped up, oh, but then just anybody could come and pick some food. And the guy said, yeah, that's that's pretty much the idea. So it would be really cool, wouldn't it? If you're going to put resources into a tree, why not put resources into an apple tree where everybody could have an apple if they wanted to? It's public land. It could be public food. Now, there is a flip side to that. Let's look at the flip side. The flip side is any kind of fruit tree, anything fruit that drops invites yellow jackets. Not just yellow jackets, but yellow jackets are like the worst thing. So that could be really dangerous for people, and you would actually have maybe a little bit more labor involved if not enough of the fruit got picked before it dropped. So there's a flip side. But if you're going to have greenery, why not have actual greens? Why not have actual lettuce and cabbage? And one of the ideas I had was, well, you need to put a sign saying you actually can eat this. It's not poison, because many people would not recognize, including myself. I'm not just going to go pick a plant and start eating it, not being 100% sure what it is. But parks in the future could actually be used to feed people. If we're going to water them, if we're going to fertilize them, if we're going to have resources put to them, why not with food? All right, so let's talk about let's talk about Tattnall Square Park a little bit more. So you know that it was started in the early 1850s. We said that at the beginning of this lecture. Its origins are even more ancient than that, though, okay? It really goes back. These are some of the things that were on Tattnall Square Park before it became Tattnall Square Park. Mastodons. So if you don't know what a mastodon is, remember, it's like a prehistoric elephant. So mastodons, actually, there's proof that they came through that area. So if you go to Tattnall Square Park and you're standing there, realize that an ancient mastodon probably walked right where you're standing. The Paleo Indians, which is basically the prehistoric Native Americans, Paleo Indians, and this is like 12,000 to 10,000 BC. That's how far back we're talking about. So this was actually used by prehistoric people, cavemen, so to speak, and all the way up to modern times. Later on, after the Paleo Indians, the Creek tribe of Native Americans actually inhabited that area at the Tattnall Square Park. So again, if you go to Tattnall Square Park, just realize there's probably a family of Creek Indians either trading or living right where you're standing. In the mid-1500s, DeSoto came through on his explorations, on his travels, and that's a famous name from history. So again, you should be really proud to have a local place. I know some of y'all that are from Augusta, you probably have your own parks that I don't know about that I'd love to hear about. But if you come to Macon, right in the heart of Georgia, we have our Tattnall Square Park has a lot of history to it, so we can be proud of that. All right, so that's about all I want you to know about the history of public parks. Hope you will do some research on the broken windows theory I told you about. Go and do some more research on the history of Tattnall Square Park. Go out and visit Tattnall Square Park. Plenty of fresh air, lots of gorgeous trees. You should be able to identify a few of them, and it'd be really awesome. Take a dendrology book with you to identify a few others that we haven't talked about. So go enjoy it. If you go to Tattnall Square Park before the end of class, let me know. Take a selfie of yourself there, and I will give you some extra credit in class. So that's a very fun extra credit field trip. All right, have a great day. See you next time.